Thank you all very much for joining us at the Business Today Best CEO Awards and the Mind Rush Conference. Mr. Scindia has just literally recovered from COVID. This is the first time since he got well that he's actually left the city. He had us with our hearts in our mouth, wondering whether he'll be fine on time. But here he is. He kept his promise. He'd given a commitment, and we're very thankful. Thank you, Minister. I hope you're fighting fit or on the way there.
When I'm on the munch with you, I have to be fighting fit. I don't have an option.
It's really nice to have you with us, and thank you. We're seeing passenger numbers for the civil aviation sector hitting record numbers. I want you to just use this opportunity to explain to everyone watching at this moment about your vision for the aviation sector in India and how you see us move from where we've reached to about 140 million passengers. Where do you see us go in the next couple of years?
So first of all, Arun Puriji, Rahul, thank you very much for having me here this evening. It's really not only a pleasure, but you're not allowed to do that, by the way. You have me with no notes and you have copious notes on your phone. Is that fair?
You don't need notes. You've got it all in your mind.
Oh, that's typical Rahul Kanwar. Round of applause for him.
He doesn't need notes. He'll try and drag me every once in a while, so just stay with us.
So, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and it's truly more than a pleasure, it's an honor. And it really is an honor because I think where the country has reached today in terms of our position on the world stage is in as much hugely the contribution of people such as those that we have awarded this evening. I do believe that in life, success is not a derivative of leadership in terms of an individual alone, but it's a team effort. And what we see in this room tonight, and as an extension of this room, across the length and breadth of India, north to south, east to west, is really at last count, 38 billion people that represent Team India. And I think it's the coming together of that aspirational desire of the people of India to excel, all of us together. And the team effort in which we are working under the leadership of the Prime Minister today, that you're seeing India hit new success factors across many parameters. So first of all, today my sincere best wishes to all the awardees. You are the reason why India is what it is today. So as an Indian today, I bow in salutation to all of you for creating this environment of new charisma, new dynamism within our country. With regard to the point that you made, I think like multiple sectors in India, civil aviation is seeing new opportunities and new growth. When we talk about infrastructure in India, as Arun Puri just said, it's changing at a massive fast pace that has never been envisioned before. But infrastructure has been the bedrock of India's growth, not today, but over the last 1,000 years. How so? The first armada, if you will, or sea transport system was brought in place by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj almost 500, 600 years ago. On the infrastructure side, you look at the GT road that was built in India. The civil aviation sector, we've got Chandrasekharanji sitting here. Air India is a pioneering airline of the private sector, started its service not post-independence, but pre-independence, where it connected not only the big cities that we talk about. In those days, it used to be Bombay, Delhi, and Kolkata, because Kolkata was the center of trade and commerce, but it also connected cities in the heartland of India, like Indore. It connected Gwalior in those days. I'm talking about 1942. So infrastructure has been the bedrock of India's progress. But in the last 9 years, the tectonic transformation, the tectonic shift that we have seen, 75,000 kilometers of highway in 2013-14, 150,000 kilometers of highway today, doubling that amount in a period of 9 years. If you look at the naval side in terms of transportation or otherwise in the port sector, and civil aviation as well. We had 74 airports that were built in 2013-14. In 9 years today, we've doubled that number to 148, including heliports and other infrastructure. So if you look at the growth rate of civil aviation or other infrastructure in India, it's been explosive and dynamic. And let me tell you, Rahul, we're not going to stop here. We've built 148 airports, heliports, and waterdromes, 74 in the last 9 years. And we're going to take this number above 200 in the next 4 to 5 years. That's the scorching pace of growth that we're going to look at. On the passenger side, we had 60 million passengers on the domestic side in 2013-14. We have 144 million passengers as on date. If you combine domestic passengers with international passengers, we're looking at a total of 200 million in this country. I'm looking at a forecast of close to about this 200 million number doubling to 400 million in the next 5 years. That's the kind of exposure and the growth that this sector is going to undergo. Another data point for you, the number of people traveling today on by first air condition and second air condition by train, which is our nearest, I don't want to use the word competitor, but our nearest Sehbagi, if I may say that, is close to about 185 million. Civil aviation is at 144 million. But the CAGR of railways is 5.6%. Civil aviation CAGR is 10.3%. And on your show tonight, let me commit that within the next decade, we will be ahead of the railways in terms of transportation for a first AC and second AC comparatively in the area of civil aviation. We've got Chandraji sitting here. Something that we in India could never dream of. The fact that an Indian airline could place an order with Airbus and Boeing, 450 aircraft with Airbus, 420 with Boeing, 250 with Airbus, 220 with Boeing, total 470 aircraft, a $70 billion order, not the highest and largest order from India, but across the world. And that's been made possible today. So civil aviation is a sector which is raring to go. And I see, if you will, using business terminology, penetration rates. 1.38 billion people in our country. 144 million people travel by air. Of those, many are repeat travelers like yourself and I. So actually the penetration in India is hardly 3 to 4%. So sky is the limit, no pun intended. We've got 94% of penetration left to achieve. And so therefore the potential for civil aviation is huge in India.
India is now the third largest market as far as domestic seat demand is concerned, but we're the 18th largest when it comes to international seat demand. How soon do you see that change? A lot of Indians still using routes in the Middle East and elsewhere as they travel abroad. How soon do you see India becoming an international player in the aviation?
So we're the third largest market domestically. We're the seventh largest market internationally at 60 million. You combine the two, domestic and international, we're today the fourth largest market. By next year, we will beat the United Kingdom and become the third largest market across the world. We've already gone ahead of the UK in terms of our economic growth numbers. The fact is that we were the 11th largest economy in 2013-14. We're today the 5th largest economy. We put the UK behind us. Those people that had a dream of ruling our country, today we're ahead of them economically, and we've got a diaspora who's actually today the Prime Minister of the UK. And that talks to our potential in terms of us as a people across the world. We are going to become the third largest economy by 2030, breasting Japan and Germany. And a similar growth rate you're going to see in the area of civil aviation. My dream, Rahul, is to make sure that we create multiple hubs in India. I don't think India as a country has the potential to have a single hub. I think with 1.38 billion people and 17% of the world's population, we have the potential to have multiple hubs in our country. Whether it's South India, whether it's North India, whether it's West India. But we have to make a beginning somewhere. And the fact is that we've been, in many ways, had legacy issues. The very fact that we have given away multiple number of our routings to our neighbors on the east and the west. The tragedy is that our hub has been created not inside India. Our hub has been created on our eastern border. Our hub has been created on our western border. And it's time to regain that hub back for India. So many of the 6 freedom rights that have been given till date. But I think it's important with our carriers like Air India and Indigo today on a fleet expansion, massive fleet expansion program. We've got to be able to offer point-to-point travel to Indians. And I think if we offer point-to-point travels both ways, coming into India and going out of India, I think we as a consumer will prefer that rather than getting rerouted through someone else's hub. And I think that time is now. I'm working currently on the Delhi airport as we speak. I was mentioning to Arun Puriji just now that by the end of this year, we do hope that Delhi will become a passenger throughput terminal of 109 million passengers per year, which means we'll be among the top 3 largest airports in the world. With a 4th runway, with a new terminal. And so what does that call for? That calls for a hub being created within India. And I'm working today with the Delhi airport, with Air India, with Indigo, to see how we can flatten out the volatility curves in terms of landing times, departure times, what we use in civil aviation parlance, MCT, minimum connect time between domestic and international travel. We've got a consultant who's right now engaged with us. And it is my dream to make sure that in the months or the years to come, we create that hub within India, and Delhi being the first in the days to come.
The board of the Airports Authority of India had shortlisted 13 airports as part of the second round of privatization of airports. We also have an election round the corner. Is that something that you're still looking at? Talk for a moment about asset monetization of the airports in the next stage.
So I think it's very important as an economic platform. We discern between asset monetization, stroke privatization, and a lease structure. What we are looking at in the Civil Aviation Department is not an asset monetization, not a privatization. What we are looking at is a lease model, and a lease model in which airports are given out for a period of 50 years. In that process, the capex that has been endured within that particular airport on a written down value method with depreciation, that amount of capital is returned to Airports Authority of India. So Airports Authority of India gets a capital receipt, if you will, and along with that capital receipt, it also gets a per passenger fee, and therefore there's a revenue stream that also accrues to Airports Authority of India throughout the tenure of the lease, if you will, over the next 50 years, and therefore there are 2 income flows to the Airport Authority of India. Why is that necessary, Rahul? Because I believe that the civil aviation sector in India needs a huge injection of capex that cannot be done by the private sector alone, that cannot be done by the government alone. It has to be a twinning in terms of an effort. And we have a very aggressive capex plan of close to about 98,000 crores between the private sector and the government over the next 5 years, where we will look at 42 brownfield airports being expanded by AI, 3 greenfield airports being put in place by AI at a capex of almost 35,000 crores, and close to about 4 airports, brownfield airports being expanded by the private sector, and 4 airports, greenfield, being built by the private sector at a capex of almost 60,000 crores. So we have a very aggressive capex plan. And if you're expanding on that capex plan, and the thrust there is not necessarily only metro connectivity and metro expansion, it's also regional connectivity. The time in India has come to put in place a hub and spoke system. We must make sure that we have last mile connectivity put place in our country. And it's only through that last mile connectivity and that hub and spoke that you will get tier 2, tier 3 customers to come into your hub and travel, so on and so forth, that you will create a robust civil aviation market. And if that has to be done, then Airports Authority of India must have the requisite amount of cash flow. And I want to make sure that from a capital perspective, AI is fully endowed with a capex plan that will see this expansion through. And some part of that cash flow is going to come from this leasing structure that we are talking about, where you have a capital receipt coming in and a revenue receipt that will boost A, its cash flow, B, its capital arsenal, if you will, and that will result in this 35,000 crore capex that we want to see happen.
One of your most ambitious schemes is the UDAN scheme,
That's right.
Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. And while regional connectivity has been a big thrust, there have been complaints that some of these airports get operationalized, flights start for a while and then they're not able to sustain and they get wound down. What lessons have you learned? How are you working towards making UDAN not just an ambitious scheme on paper, but commercially viable for airlines so they're actually flying aircraft on those routes?
So I think one of the biggest changes, Rahul, that has taken place in the 9 years of the Prime Minister's government, certainly for my department, is the democratization of civil aviation. Civil aviation as a product was always seen as a very elitist product. It was always meant for a chosen few. And I think through Ude Desh Ke Aam Nagrik and the Prime Minister's notion that ki Hawai Chappal pehne wala bhi Hawai Jahaj mein ude, through the VGF, the Viability Gap Funding model that we have put in place, UDAN is a scheme that was kicked off in 2016. So we are only 6 years into its inception. Within those 6 years, let's look at the statistics, right? And you talked about on paper. Let me tell you what the data says. And data is something that we cannot argue with. In the last 6 years, 473 routes that could never ever be feasible have been made feasible through UDAN. 74 airports that possibly one would never think of building. Kishangarh in Rajasthan, Rupsi in Assam, many places that you gentlemen, ladies sitting in the audience today would possibly never even have heard of. Darbhanga, Jharsuguda, all been built during these last 6 years. And when you talk about throughput, airports like Darbhanga, Jharsuguda, bringing to the fore close to between 2 lakh to 5 lakh passengers per year. We have flown close to 1 crore 16 lakh passengers through UDAN. 2 lakh 20,000 flights in 6 years. UDAN is a scheme that has not given birth to not only our people's aspirations on the ground, the farmer that would plow his field and look above him and see an airplane flying in the air. He today flies in that airplane. Not only that, but for many entrepreneurs seated here today, 11 airlines are a part of UDAN. And UDAN has given birth to 3 new airlines. Star Air, Fly One Air, Big Air, Fly Big. Airlines that have been spawned by this scheme. So a new era of civil aviation has come to the fore. A new dawn has come. And my target is in the next 3 to 4 years, we must have 1,000 routes that applied through UDAN. 473 routes are today operationalized. And many of them, it's actually, the story is the other way around, Rahul. Many routes that were initially started by UDAN have today become viable. UDAN is only a scheme for 3 years. The VGF finishes after 3 years. But those planes are still, and those airlines are still flying those routes because now they become viable. Because the customer once used to flying by air becomes habitual. And therefore, the stickiness or the GUI factor comes in. And therefore, UDAN today has led to multiple routes and airlines becoming sustainable over the last 6 years.
Mr. Scindia, you were the blue-eyed boy of the UPA government. You now hold important portfolios in the Modi Sarkar. What's the difference between being a minister in a Congress government and being a minister in a BJP government?
If you want me to put it succinctly, Rahul, as you're well aware, my background was, prior to being in public service, was a professional background. I was a banker for 6.5 years. And in a professional background, we look at deadlines. We look at timelines. We look at PERT charts. We look at Gantt charts. Having worked with the Prime Minister and in this government over the last 2 years, this is a government that is focused on delivery, focused on performance, focused on implementation. And let me give you an example of that. In cabinet meetings, when we meet and we discuss and we talk, the Prime Minister's constant refrain is that I do not want this government to be a government like many others before mine, which has heralded in countless number of schemes. But what I want you all to achieve, every single person around this table, is to make sure that the schemes that have been implemented achieve 100% saturation. So our concentration is on 100% saturation. Whether it's the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, whether it is the Ujjwala Yojana, whether it is the Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadak Yojana, whether in my area in civil aviation and steel, the targets that we have set, and I set internal targets, and many people seated here today between my two ministries have experienced how we work together as a group. We set targets for ourselves within our team, whether it's 6-month targets, quarterly targets, annual targets, and we review those very much like you would in the multiple portfolios that you're handling today. So we are seeing today, for the first time in the history of India, a professional private sector and a professional government.
I was hoping for a slightly easier, lighter answer. You gave a very serious answer, no? Because you were earlier part of Rahul Gandhi's core circle. Mr. Gandhi himself said that Jyotir could walk into my house anytime. He was quite disappointed when you left. And now I see you do press conferences where you are attacking Rahul Gandhi. How easy or tough is that? Because I see you do that press conference and I wonder, given where you were to where you are now, how does it play in your head?
Very simply, and I'll tell you this. First of all, you have to understand, Rahul, where my calling comes from. My calling doesn't come from either politics, post, or chair. Arun ji here has been familiar with 3 generations of my family. My grandmother, my father, and now with me. My father used to put it very succinctly, and it's something that didn't ring inside me until that responsibility weighed on me. He said, जिंदगी में हमारा लक्ष्य राजनीति नहीं होना चाहिए, हमारा लक्ष्य जनसेवा होना चाहिए, और राजनीति केवल एक माध्यम होनी चाहिए उस लक्ष्य की पूर्ति करने के लिए. So you've got to make sure that your goal is pure, your vision is pure, and then you have to choose the path towards that. Very simply put, I think any successful institution in the world, whether it's the India Today group, whether it's many of the groups that have spanned generations seated in this auditorium today, have 3 challenges before them. 1, how do you attract talent? 2, how do you retain talent? And 3, how do you respect talent? And if you're not able to attract talent, if you're not able to retain talent, and most importantly, because at the end of the day, we as human beings don't care about post, money, and all of that. At the end of the day, we only, and we should, only care about our self-respect. If you're not able to respect talent, then you're not going to survive for very long. And I think Samazdar ko ishara kafi hai.
Very interesting. You know, one of the, you haven't said so publicly, but it's quite obvious that one of the things that you'd like to do is to be Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. There's a big election in a few months from now. Is that something that plays in your head at some point in time? Not necessarily in December, but at some point in time?
So let me answer that very clearly to you. I sometimes think that it's, I don't think whether I should call it a genetic order or a genetic disorder. But this attribute, stroke accusation, stroke deficiency, if you will, was something that was always first attributed to my grandmother, then my father, and I hope in my lifetime to me. After the many turns and twists in my life, Rahul, especially one significant one, which was 22 years ago, my thinking has become much more philosophical. And I believe that it's important in life, in your daily life, to be true to yourself, to be true to the cause that you live for and want to strive for. And I don't think that being ambitious for a post or a position is something that is necessarily a virtuous attribute. I think दिल और आत्मा सही जगह होनी चाहिए, और अगर दिल और आत्मा सही जगह हो, उस सफर पे जैसे अटल जी कहते थे, ये भी सही, वो भी सही.
Mr. Scindia, it is philosophical best. One last question, we'll wrap up very soon. Switching from one...
So I'm not... So just finishing that off, that thought. To be very candid with you, I'm not ambitious for myself, but I'm extremely ambitious for development. I'm extremely ambitious for progress, because I'm blessed and I'm thankful every single minute of my life for the opportunity that I have been given. And I think if you're on that path to serve, you must have that honesty of purpose. And I think it's very important to be ambitious, to change the paradigm, ambitious to change the way things are. And I'm going to quote Nelson Mandela, because he's in many ways my idol. And he said once, in the 30 years that he spent in prison, where he was in a dark, dingy cell, and the only ray of light that he had was through a 2 foot by 2 foot window about 2.5 feet above his head. And he said that most of us think of the way things are and ask the question why. I think of that has never been and ask the question, why not?
Wow, very nice. Lastly, moving from one organization to another is, in some senses, moving from one company to the other. How was it like transitioning from the ways of the Congress to the BJP? And why I ask this question, and I want to give context to our viewers, that I meet a lot of people from the Sangh Parivar. And as you speak to somebody who's born and brought up in the Sangh Parivar, and the way they talk about Mr. Scindia, they talk as if you were one of their own, which you aren't because you came from the outside, but the way that you adapted to the ways of the BJP and the RSS is quite incredible. I don't want to take names, but in comparison to some of the others who made this career switch, they just seem to have welcomed you more warmly. How did you make the transition? What lessons did you learn? And are you having to work harder in the BJP than you did in the Congress?
Oh, definitely so. I have no qualms about that. And I think it's an important experience. I think in life, when you make changes or changes happen in your life, I think it's important to be able to go back to the shop floor. I mean, that's a lingo that you'll understand. And start again at the bottom from the shop floor. I don't think that changing companies or changing political parties is the way to look at it, but I really think it's the underpinning philosophy, values, missions, and goals. That is what you need to concentrate on. For me, let me say this, Rahul, that it's kind of ironical, but it's not for me, it was not a changing into a new environment in many ways. And I'll tell you the reason why. My grandmother started as a Congress member of Parliament, and she went on to found the Bharatiya Janata Party, the Jan Sangh, and the Bharatiya Janata Party today. My father started his career in public service as a Jan Sangh member of Parliament in 1971. and he went on to become the deputy leader of the Congress party. Now, ironically, I started my career in public service as a member of the Congress party. And today, I feel blessed in terms of the opportunity that I have to serve under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi in the BJP. And I really believe that every organization goes through metamorphoses. And I think that under Prime Minister Modi, we have the potential today, literally, and I mean that, to reach for the stars. And I think the important feeling that he has engendered in each one of us as an Indian is that we, not as a singularity, but we as a collective can achieve that. And I think that feeling has been imbibed today in every Indian. And that's why you're seeing the unleashing of enterprise, of entrepreneurism, of new dynamism. The fact that we had 450 startups in 13-14 and we have 80,000 today. We had one unicorn, we have 115 unicorns today. You're seeing massive improvements in private sector, in public sector, in the way governments engage, not only central government, but state governments. And India has moved massively. The fact that something like Nandan and Chandrasekharan ji will vibe with me. The fact that we could create 50 crore bank accounts in this country over a period of 9 years. The fact that digitalization today has transformed the Indian landscape. The fact that when we were faced with COVID and we gave 220 crore vaccinations in this country, each one was accompanied with a COVID certificate. In New York City, you went to the hospital and you had a little handwritten chit given to you that Rahul Kanwal, age so-and-so, vaccinated on so-and-so day. In India, you had a laminated certificate which was on your mobile phone that was given to you digitally, that you were certified. This is the new India. And let me also emphasize this, because I believe very strongly in this as not only as a citizen of the country, but a comparatively younger person with an old soul. It is the twinning of not only India's economic power, ladies and gentlemen, that is being unleashed today. It is the twinning of India's economic power with her adhyatmik shakti, her philosophical power. We are the oldest cultural lineage country in this world today. Our traditions all today are back at the forefront. The fact that today yoga is celebrated across the world, your World Yoga Day. The fact that we are today having the presidency of the G20 in India. And that G20 is not happening in Delhi alone. It's happening in 55 cities across the country. So India today is being celebrated across the world. And it is because of this coming together of us as a collective. That is why the reason why this is happening.
This is absolutely correct. While I was on campus, I got a Pfizer shot for COVID. And I told the lady at the pharmacy to email the certificate. And she said, we can't email it, we can only give you a printout. I said, what do you mean you can't email it? They said, no, we have no provision to be able to email it. So things we take for granted thanks to companies like TCS and Infosys weren't possible even in a country like the United States.
I'll give you another example. This is a mindset issue. First of all, I think whether we are in government or the private sector, Benjamin Franklin once said that if you fail to plan, then you're planning to fail. So there's got to be a method to the madness. And Narendran ji is sitting here with me today. He's a member of my advisory committee in my Ministry of Steel. And we have two advisory committees that we've set up, one for ISPs, which is integrated steel plants, and the other for SSIs, the secondary steel sector. We've met multiple times, and these are not normal bureaucratic ministry meetings. We've got the private sector and the government sitting together. And we sit around, first of all, not a square table, not a rectangular table, but we sit around a round table. Because if we are anything, we are equal stakeholders in each other's success. And in their success lies our success. And many times, every meeting when we walk off the table, we minute what has been discussed today, what is Narendra ji's responsibility, what is Sajjan Jindal's responsibility, or Naveen Jindal's responsibility, or sales responsibility, and what is my secretary's responsibility and what is the minister's responsibility. And the next time we meet, I present the ATR and I respond to the private sector in terms of the responsibility that was given to me. What have I done in the last 15 days or 30 days in terms of progressing their future? And I think that's, if we work in that team spirit, then in their success, as I said, lies the government's success and our combined success as a country.
Well, you run your ministries like a chief executive would run his organization. We want to thank you for joining us and deeply appreciate you taking out time. Before we wrap up, Ayush wants to set up just a group photograph with all the winners, and then the bar is open. Ayush.
Thank you very much for having me.